Carrière, Chief of Protocol of Canada and personal representative of the Prime Minister of Canada for la Francophonie. We also have Andrea Hudson, Director, Official Visits. Welcome. And from the Privy Council Office, we have Christine Kennedy, Acting Assistant Secretary, Foreign and Defense Policy Secretariat. So you'll have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement. Is everyone providing an opening statement, or both of you? Perfect. Who would like to go first? We'll give you up to 5 minutes for your opening statement, and then we'll proceed with yourself after. Welcome to PROC. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, members of Parliament. My name is Sébastien Carrière, and as Canada's Chief of Protocol, I'm pleased to meet you today to explain the role of Canada's Office of Protocol in organising official visits to Canada by foreign heads of state or government. The Office of Protocol of Canada is responsible for the management and coordination of the state's international protocol functions, including a range of services for the Foreign Diplomatic Corps in Canada, high-level visits, and official events hosted by the Prime Minister. Is an important expression and instrument of Canada's foreign policy. Some of the main goals in receiving international visits include to promote Canada, to strengthen Canada's relationships with international partners, and to deepen people-to-people ties. The Office of Protocol coordinates all visits to Canada by foreign dignitaries invited by the Prime Minister and serves as the channel of communication between the representatives of the visitor and federal partners such as the Parliamentary Protocol Office, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the Privy Council Office. We establish and maintain a high-level diplomatic framework within which effective planning between the two governments can take place and issues can be resolved. We provide high-level advice on matters of diplomacy, protocol, and logistics. We develop and implement the visit program in support of the mutual foreign policy objectives of the visitor and the host. In the planning stages of the visit, we are the main interface with the visiting country's embassy or high commission. We develop the program and implement logistical arrangements together with the federal partners with whom we closely coordinate. En ce qui concerne les éléments de programme qui se As far as the schedule of events taking place in the parliamentary precinct is concerned, we work closely with the parliamentary protocol to coordinate the logistics of activities taking place in Parliament. When a potential or confirmed visit includes an activity taking place in the parliamentary precinct, we initiate discussions about the desired program and scheduling events. In the House of Commons, we act as the interface between parliamentary protocol and the foreign visitors on matters of logistics and program implementation. On the day of the address itself, we work collaboratively with parliamentary counterparts to ensure the scenario unfolds as agreed to by all stakeholders, including the foreign visitor. Comme le comité l'a déjà entendu, as the committee has already heard, invitations to speak in Parliament are sent out by parliamentary protocol. We do not have access to the full guest list. However, we do contribute the list of members of the official delegation and diplomatic corps who are expected to attend the event. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Je serai heureux de répondre à vos questions. I'll be pleased to respond to your questions.
À vous.
Thank you to you.
Ms. Kennedy.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chairperson, members of Parliament.
I'm Chair, members of the committee for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Christine Kennedy. I am the Acting Assistant Secretary to Cabinet for Operations with the Foreign and Defense Policy Secretariat at the Privy Council Office. With respect to the issue being considered by this committee, the invitation and recognition of Jaroslav Hanka in Parliament on September 22nd, 2023, I wish to confirm that the Privy Council Office had no role in any invitation to him or in his recognition in Parliament. J'ai le plaisir de me joindre à vous.
I'm pleased to join you today to explain the role of the Foreign and Defence Policy Secretariat in organising official visits.
The Privy Council Office's Foreign and Defence Policy Secretariat is responsible for monitoring, coordinating, and providing advice on various international issues, spanning defense, diplomacy, trade, and development assistance. A key function of the Secretariat is providing support to the Prime Minister for international engagements, including interactions with foreign dignitaries. Notably, visits of international leaders serves as crucial platforms to advance Canada's international and domestic objectives and interests. President Zelensky's visit to Canada in September 2023 was the opportunity to demonstrate Canada's solidarity with the people of Ukraine as they fight for their sovereignty and democracy. This particular visit had three strategic objectives: to reaffirm Canada's solidarity with the government and the people of Ukraine at a crucial moment in the war, to demonstrate resolve to provide unwavering support to Ukraine, to emphasize Canada's commitment to Ukraine's immediate recovery and long-term reconstruction. President Zelensky's visit yielded tangible results, including $650 million in new military assistance for armored vehicles built in Canada and the signing of the modernized Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. In addition, engagement with the private sector bolstered economic ties, while engagements with Canada's Ukrainian community deepened strong people-to-people connections. Each visit that we support has a unique context with specific objectives. We collaborate closely with Global Affairs Canada to prioritize and recommend visits by closely evaluating foreign policy goals and potential achievable outcomes for the engagements. As part of the planning process, we do convene interdepartmental meetings with Global Affairs and other implicated departments as appropriate, such as Department of National Defense, Finance, and Public Safety, as well as the Prime Minister's Office. During these meetings, we ensured agreed-upon foreign policy objectives and desired outcomes, including advancement of domestic interests, are appropriately reflected in the program elements for the visit. In line with Foreign and Defense Policy's primary role of providing policy advice, the Secretariat also prepares comprehensive briefing material to support the Prime Minister. This includes overview scenario notes, issue briefs, and meeting notes. Logistics and security arrangements are handled by other entities, such as Global Affairs Office for Protocol and the RCMP. The Privy Council Office is not responsible for vetting individuals or reviewing invitation lists for the House of Commons. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Je suis heureuse de répondre.
I'd be pleased to respond to your questions.
Thank you very much. We will now enter into our 6-minute rounds, starting with Mr. Duncan, followed by Mr. Duguid, and then Madame Goudreau, suivi par Madame Matheson. Mr. Duncan, 6 minutes through the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here this morning. In your opening comments, one of the things here is what happened in the House of Commons and having Mr. Hunka recognized that day as being a complete embarrassment internationally for Canada and for our Prime Minister. But one of the other key aspects which neither of you had raised in your comments was also another embarrassing factor was the fact that Mr. Hunka was invited to the other official event that happened during that visit in Toronto. So one of the questions that I want to start off, Ms. Kennedy, perhaps with you is, when we talk about the vetting of lists for the House of Commons being one thing, this could have been avoided by a vetting process as well for the Toronto event where Mr. Hunka was invited to. Could you talk about, for that event, which PCO is responsible for, a partner in, or having lists for, what vetting you do? And Mr. Kerr, I'm going to ask you the same question from your office.
Point of order.
Mr. Gerritsen, point of order.
Just for clarity, Madam Speaker, my understanding is that we are studying the issue that happened in the House of Commons. Mr. Duncan is introducing something that happened at another event outside the House of Commons. Can you provide some clarity as to direction in terms of where we're going?
So I would have to agree that it is about what happened in the House of Commons. The last time there was more leniency given because the House Leader had come and brought in the other events. So they brought in and expanded the scope. So only appropriate we ask questions when they expand the scope. Versus, I would say, our guests are here today to speak about what took place in the House of Commons. I did not hear any reference to anything outside of the House of Commons.
I can try to build. I didn't get my first question out, so I'm trying to make a connection.
I think what we're doing is, rather than going too far, Mr. Gerritsen and I would have to agree with him in this case, we're remaining within the incident that took place in the House of Commons, and so witnesses will be allowed to answer as you would please. But I think you've heard the question. you want to just let them see if they want to try to answer?
I'm just going to appeal that if I could, Madam Chair, because what I'm trying to, I couldn't even get done to have the first question answered here, is that the lack of vetting for other events on that same visit by the Prime Minister's office, the PCO, and the Protocol office, if they'd had, I want to understand what they had for those events. And in the event, the red flags that have been raised about Mr. Hunka and not being recognized should not have been invited, which the Prime Minister's office has acknowledged that the individual we are speaking about should not have been invited to their event. If they had better protocols or what they were, perhaps this would not have happened on the floor of the House of Commons. So I'm trying to correlate very reasonably and very fairly that the official visit here, the chief of protocol is here. They're speaking about the official visit, the entire visit by President Zelensky. It is very relevant to do that. So I'm going to appeal that call and say it's absolutely relevant to try to show how a lack of proper vetting was done in many cases here. There were many opportunities to catch this and we're not.
Okay. I'm going to actually, no. I'm moving on. I've told you where I stand. We know what the motion was. You can reread the motion if you're concerned with it, which members decided to pass. So you are well aware, all of you, what we passed. We spoke about the incident in the gallery of the House of Commons. That is why our guests are here today. You've heard the question, and I would now pass the floor back to our guests to hear their voices as well. Thank you for coming to PROC.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I'll just be clear right up front. PCO was not aware Yaroslav Hunka was invited to the address or part of the speaker's speech before the speaker delivered his speech in Parliament. As you have heard, the list of guests invited to an address in Parliament are managed by the Office of Protocol at Parliament. I would just also add that we were requested from PCO to provide a list of 25 government officials who could attend the address to Parliament, which we did in consultation with key departments such as Global Affairs Canada, Public Safety, and the Department of National Defence to collate that list.
Just before, Mr. My question was about the event in Toronto. So both offices here and your offices were responsible for that guest list for that event. I want to know what vetting was done for the guest list where the Prime Minister's office provided an invitation to Mr. Hunka. For that event, what vetting and process was followed to vet guests from that list that your office did invite that included Mr. Hunka?
Mr. Gerritsen.
Mr. Duncan is deliberately and intentionally not heeding to your ruling. You're the chair of this meeting. You have ruled on what is admissible in terms of questioning, and they have to relate to the event that happened in the House of Commons. Now, you ruled on that. You made a decision on that. And Mr. Duncan is deliberately ignoring your ruling and trying to continue to engage along that dialogue, despite the fact that he might not agree with your ruling. So I would encourage you to call him to order, Madam Speaker. Madam Chair.
And I've appealed that.
And I've decided against it. So back to
Could we
the
put
report.
the question perhaps to the...
No, I've told you that
This-
we are here. Okay, anybody can throw a tantrum if they'd like. I'm very simple. This is really simple. We are here. What's the reason why we're here today? Let me remind us all. I think I said at the beginning of it, the committee is meeting today to continue its study of parliamentary protocol related to the incident in the Speaker's Gallery on Friday, September 22nd, 2023. Is there a Speaker's Gallery in Toronto? Yes. Is it a different level of government? Yes. Will elections come for all levels of government? Sure. If that's where the interest lies, go for it. But right now, we're in the nation's capital. We're in Ottawa. The gallery we're referring to is in the House of Commons in Ottawa, and that's why our witnesses are here. So, Mr. Duncan, please remain within the scope of why we're here. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm just going to say here, this is, I would say, appeal the ruling, and perhaps if the committee has to take a vote on this and challenge the chair's ruling on this, because I'm going to go back and repeat again of where it is relevant to
There's
the
no
questions.
debate. Challenge the chair. Question, clerk.
I didn't have an opportunity to.
You want to challenge it? Let's go.
Well, I did the first time, and then you didn't call the question,
I'm
so now
good.
you're.
Let's go. We just called the
So
question.
now-
Let's go.
You just asked for
Yeah.
I did the first time, and then
You just said those words. I heard them clearly. The question's
you
been
didn't
called.
challenge.
Vote.
This is,
You said you disagreed with her. You never challenged the rule.
Vote.
Should be.
The question is, shall the chair's ruling be sustained?
Can't even ask a question for Toronto.
Ms. Romanato?
The question is, shall it be sustained? Shall the chair's ruling be sustained?
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Romanato?
Yes.
Mr. Lauzon?
Wait.
Mr. Duguid?
Sustain?
Mr. Gerritsen? Yes. Mr. Hanley?
Sustain.
Mr. Duncan?
No.
Ms. Wagenthal?
No.
Ms. Falk?
No.
Mr. Patzer?
No.
Madame Gaudreau? Ms. Matheson? 7 yeas, 4 nays.
I'm not sure what's happening, but we have a 3-hour meeting possibly or up to today. So I'm just going to ask members, if you need a break, I'll give you guys a 5-minute break, but this is not the tone and temperament I'm going to continue with when we've asked witnesses to come. So, Mr. Duncan, are you okay to proceed with why we're here? Because now you've had everything done that you needed. Can we at least focus on let the guests or witnesses provide the information they're here to provide?
I'm just stunned at this, Madam Chair,
Okay,
about
so
how
you-
it's absolutely, so, Mr. Carrier, if in your office, in the department, that you have as chief of protocol for official visits, if in other parts and other events that you host, how do you vet a guest list for other things that you might have within your office for events that you have?
So thank you for the question. So indeed, there are completely separate processes depending on where the event is. I like to say half jokingly that I'm the Chief of Protocol of Canada everywhere except here, with the possible exception of the PM's corridor upstairs. So the parliamentary guest list was a complete separate from us. Sometimes we feed into those. They'll ask us who to invite from the diplomatic corps to an address or another, and liaise with the visiting delegation on who from the delegation should be invited if not everybody can be invited. But at no point.
But so I can ask
Yeah.
just in general, for for an event that you're responsible for and would do and have a guest list where you send invitations out, apparently now in theory, without saying something specific, another event that you be responsible for the guest list, can you tell me what your office does for vetting a guest list that you're responsible for then?
We don't vet guest lists, Madam Chair. What we do is we get them from the client. The client would be, in this case, either PMO or one of the minister's offices. And they send us a list. Often it's in waves. If you're having a reception or a state dinner of some, you'll do a first wave of invitation, and then depending on the response rate, second wave, third wave, fourth wave. So we don't vet the guests.
For any of the events that you do, for any events that you would host and be primarily responsible for, if somebody provides, an organization provides names, you just automatically from the Prime Minister's office or through both Director of Protocol through the Prime Minister just invite them no matter what.
We get the list from PMO.
PMO.
So we wouldn't accept lists
So,
from.
Ms. Kennedy, in those in the example there, where in your office for what you do there, what do you do for vetting on any events or lists that come out from the Prime Minister's office?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I would just state that Foreign Defense Policy Secretariat is very much focused on the policy support to our Prime Minister as he does his international engagements. In the event that we receive invitations and lists for events, what we normally do is just do a cursory review of that list. Our lens is very much on the gender representation of those that would be in attendance. We also ensure that the organizations, if they are on that list, are appropriately invited.
So again, if the Prime Minister is sending an invitation to a Canadian, anybody, to any event, you're just telling me that if some organization provided a list of 15 names that should attend event X, Y, or Z as an official visit or in the diplomatic community, you just take those names and automatically send them out in the Prime Minister's name, inviting to a special event. There's no vetting that's done from a security person. But now, Mr. Carrier, you said that you're just provided the list and send it out. But the list comes from the Prime Minister's office. So I'm asking the Prime Minister's office, PCO, what you do for the vetting of those lists before you provide them to be sent out. They're in the Prime Minister's name on behalf of the Prime Minister, and you're telling me that you just, if some group says, here's 15 people we want to invite, you just copy and paste it to be sent out and don't do any vetting on the list.
Madam Chair, PCO does not play a role in sending out invitations. At the request of the Prime Minister's office, we sometimes request that Global Affairs Canada pulls together and collates a list. When it is returned to us, we do that cursory review. However, we do not have responsibility to issue invitations.
Thank you for that clear, concise answer. Mr. Dugan, 6 minutes through the chair.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank our witnesses for appearing today and for your service to our country and the important functions that you play and do. I believe this meeting is televised, so it's an opportunity for Canadians to learn about the protocol process and, of course, to shed light on this unfortunate incident, which I think has wide agreement around the table. So, and maybe just so it sinks in to all listening, can you please outline, and this is probably to our GAC friends, can you please outline, in the context of an official visit to Canada by a foreign head of state or other senior dignitary, how your office engages with a myriad of players? There's a lot of fingers in this pie. The Office of the Secretary of the Governor-General, the Prime Minister's Office, the Privy Council Office, and very importantly, the Speaker of the House of Commons, and in this case, his office, because my understanding is that Mr. Hunka was invited by the Speaker, and you play no role in vetting names coming from the Speaker's office, is my understanding. But maybe to just describe how those players interact with your good offices, and particularly that reference to the Speaker's office, who issued the invitation to Mr. Hunka, for which the Speaker has taken responsibility.
Okay, thank you for the question. So, Madam Chair, it's a pretty fluid process in terms of organizing visits. There are several categories of visits. We have state visits, official visits, working visits, private visits. I can get into the details of that if you're interested, but essentially a state visit would be hosted by the Governor General. Official and working visits would be invited by the Prime Minister, and a private visit is just a head of state, visiting family or a private visit to Canada with no interaction with our leadership. So visits are often initiated through the course of a bilateral meeting at a summit or an incoming visit or diplomatic exchanges. And then the visit itself and the dates of the visit and the type of visit will be confirmed through extensive consultations as appropriate with Rideau Hall, Prime Minister's Office, with PCO, geographic divisions within Global Affairs, and the two embassies or high commissions. The visits division, so my bureau has three divisions. One does visits, one does events, the other manages the diplomatic corps. So the visits and the events division are the two sort of key implicated division. We'll then start, providing logistical and protocol coordination in close collaboration with the, Rideau Hall, PMO, PCO, GAC, RCMP, and so on. And this is where the Parliament piece comes in. If there's a parliamentary component to it, we will liaise with parliamentary protocol. To be clear on the Speaker's office, we have no direct relationship with the Speaker's office. So any issues regarding, an address to Parliament would be dealt by us through the parliamentary protocol. Then we'll define the standards of treatment, what we do, how we, the arrival, who's going to be greeting, every little detail with the visiting delegation. Then we'll have an advance visit. We'll go through all the sites with them, including here. We would come here, and then parliamentary protocol would host us and the visiting advance delegation. And we'd go around and walk through all the sites and so on and so forth. So that's sort of what we do. We oversee the budgets and approve the expenses too, and then report on them at a later date. And then the events team will be in charge of organizing any events that are related to the visit.
Well, thank you for that Protocol 101, which I think we've all benefited from. To Ms. Kennedy, so PCO is essentially the public service that serves the Prime Minister, and just to repeat, to make it clear to our viewers, PCO, serving the Prime Minister, has no role in vetting or dealing with lists coming and invitees coming from the Speaker's office. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We do not have any direct relationship or engagement with the Speaker's office when it comes to addresses to Parliament.
Okay. And I would, and I think the committee would appreciate your thoughts on, because we want our international visits to go well in the future, your recommendations and how we prevent unfortunate incidents like this happening in the future. So we would appreciate any thoughts you have. My time is up. 20 seconds, Madam Speaker, but I'll give them back to you. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Madame Gaudreau, 6 minutes à vous, permis la présidente.
6 minutes through the chair. Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. My colleague opposite just set the scene. Thank you very much for being here. Of course, we have the French PM coming tomorrow, so I'm greatly appreciative. Now, there are two issues at hand here that are important to my mind. First, to shed light on what the ramifications are of this kind of incident, and then second, what should we do going forward? So what were the implications? I'm not a diplomat, but I understand that Canadian diplomats had to mobilise in this instance. So what was the upshot of this incident? Thank you very much for your question, Madam Chairperson. Well, as far as the ramifications are concerned, of course, it created a lot of embarrassment. It made the headlines worldwide for the wrong reasons, of course, but I don't think that anyone drew particular conclusions about Canada's support or lack thereof for Ukraine. I don't think it had long-term consequences, but that's just my opinion. I'm not an expert when it comes to Canada-Ukraine relations, but I accompanied the PM in Poland, and when we were planning that visit prior, during and after, the incident wasn't raised by anyone whatsoever. So that's a sign to me that the oxygen had been taken out of the whole situation. Now, as far as the response to the previous member's question is concerned, we're the people who execute the plan. There are two things that we need to think of going forward. First, the independence of the Parliament, of the legislative branch vis-a-vis the executive branch. I'm a representative of the executive branch. I'm the chief of protocol everywhere throughout Canada except here, as I said. Now, had I requested the list from the PMO's office ahead of time, I would have been told that it wasn't my purview, and rightly so. I'm a political scientist by training, and I learned those basics at university. So I don't know how we should avoid this kind of occurrence going forward from someone looking in from the outside. If I understood correctly, the Speaker of the House made remarks after the incident, and obviously there were certain things that didn't go right in his office, and the Speaker's office, I believe, has conducted an overview of the vetting of these speakers' list of guests. So I think there is your probable solution to avoid a political crisis of this. We wouldn't have the executive scrutinising or vetting the list of the Speaker of the House. Madam Chair, what I understand is that, well, essentially, we're trying to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. especially since it's obviously something that's highly sensitive. Now, Madam Chair, there's nothing better than when you hear a witness who says that they execute the process, but it's hard to know what to do from being on the outside. Obviously, the protocol has to be sophisticated, complex, it needs to be upheld. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the protocol itself. I have a couple of minutes left. Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Well, you, of course, issue recommendations as to how things should proceed going forward. But when it comes to invitations, for example, in the context of a secret visit, it's difficult to take specific action in that regard. I can't tell you what happened within the Speaker's office. I have no visibility there. I have no input as to who's invited and who's not. But there are two things here. There's the invitation, and then there's the acknowledgement of that invitation. And I think that that's where we should be focusing in on. I think that had that guest simply been invited, that wouldn't have been an issue. But the fact that the Speaker of the House rose to recognise and acknowledge the presence of that individual in the House, that therein lies the rub. I've been in my role for decades, and I have brought delegations to attend the question period, and sometimes I've asked that a Minister of Foreign Affairs from a particular country be acknowledged by the Speaker, and sometimes I'm told yay and sometimes nay. That's just the way things are. And there's evidently a process, but in this specific case at hand, there was obviously a mistake made in terms of the process, and perhaps that will be picked up in the Speaker's office's review and in the wake of the committee's recommendations. Well, Madam Chair, it's my take on this that not only is our work useful, but given that I've gone over this with a fine-tooth comb, obviously this is a comms issue. There are perhaps shortcomings when it comes to communications. But at the end of the day, Madam Chair, when it's all well and good to have a guest list, but when you officially acknowledge someone's presence in the House, well, that's a different kettle of fish. And I think that we really could have avoided that. I think my time's run out.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to all the witnesses. Providing your time out of your busy schedules. All right, so I think a lot of my questions on this have already been answered, but considering, I mean, there were a lot of hurt, people hurt by this, and this is serious incident. I just wanted to be clear. So, Mr. Carrier, you had said that and understandably so, that division of that parliamentary side and that executive side is very clear, and there are clear benefits of keeping it that way. There are no changes that you can see within that we would recommend here. There's nothing whatsoever in terms of your roles that, or an expansion or anything that you've learned or we've learned from this that you could provide in terms of a recommendation. There's nothing, right? You've been pretty clear, but I wanted just to double check.
Madam Chair, I thank the honourable member for her question. I really don't think it's my place to tell Parliament what to, or parliamentary committee what to put in a report. I can, however, state, the facts and things how they work now, and it's hard for me to imagine, the executive branch having oversight on something that
even as like a double check, even as not a directive, but as a like a double check of the system?
Well, then it leads back to the question of capacity. Do we have vetting capacity? So, then there would have to be a conversation with the Minister of Foreign Affairs and enhancing our team and adding, a vetting unit of some sort, getting the lists weeks in advance so that people would have time to do that. And then what do we do? Is it just a Google search? That takes some time, but not too much. Would a Google search have revealed the past of this individual? I don't know. I wish we could go back in time and Google him before the address to see what pops up. And then you go further and turn to our security agencies to vet And then they would say, are you crazy? We're not going to vet 1,000 people. You know, the RCMP does, police databases and the like. But reputational vetting is a whole different ball of wax.
Yes, and our protective services, the Sergeant of Arms was quite clear on that as well in previous testimony that they had that under control. It was a matter of resources, and if that's the will, that we change things. But you're basically saying the same thing. It's just as a viewpoint or as a spectator of all of that. I understand that. Ms. Kennedy, you had talked about PCO not doing that vetting. You had referred to it as a cursory review, which is fine, I understand. And you specifically said that you might look at those lists, those outside lists, to ensure that there was gender representation and that rules of protocol were abide by. Is there anything else that you would look at in any way, shape, or form, just to be clear on that?
For the Foreign and Defense Policy Secretary, it's not within our mandate to conduct the vetting of invites. We very much rely on other entities within our system to do that. However, before forwarding it on, we do take a look at the list just as a cursory review. Often we don't have a lot of time to do that. We're just simply looking at any errors that could be, grammatical errors within the list, ensuring that the appropriate organizations are there, scanning it from a gender representation perspective, which is important for us, for example, during business roundtables. And I would say we rely heavily on our global affairs experts as well as our PCO experts to kind of take that extra lens. I would just add that for the list of invitees to the address in Parliament, the Foreign and Defense Policy Secretariat, nor all of PCO, we did not receive that list.
Okay. And it's only gender representation? It's not GBA plus based look at things?
It certainly is. It's the
Okay.
whole gamut of what's important for us. For the Foreign Defense Policy Secretariat, we're responsible for providing policy advice. When we're supporting incoming and outgoing visits, we're very much focused on where can we advance our foreign policy objectives and support our domestic interests. So that's the kind of cursory lens that we take.
Okay. To be perfectly honest, I don't think I have any other questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We'll go into the second round, starting 5 minutes to Mr. Duncan, suivi par Monsieur Lauzon. Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again to our witnesses. When we talk about this visit and what the goals were for this, we mentioned about strengthening relationships between Canadians and Ukrainians in their time of need right now. Would you also agree with me that one of the goals out of this was to be successful would be that there would not be any opportunity for the Russians in their typical misinformation and disinformation campaigns to have something they would latch onto to try to distract from the visit and take away from its success? Would you agree that not providing Russian misinformation campaigns with fodder be a goal to deem this trip successful?
It's more a policy question, but I think we can all agree that not providing Russia with material for disinformation is always a goal for every visit.
Agreed. And sadly, that's what happened out of this international embarrassment back in September. We talk about the overarching goals of what happened, and I think between what was covered in the media, what Canadians and people around the world saw was exactly this incident, and we're trying to figure out how it could be avoided, should have been avoided, and could be avoided in the future. So one of the things, Ms. Kennedy, about vetting, maybe this is an opportunity for lessons learned about what we've learned from past mistakes perhaps the Liberal government has made. Can you confirm that whenever visits to Canada by a foreign head of state or dignitary or diplomatic mission come, you work on the protocol or events or lists and so forth, but the other way around, when the Prime Minister travels around the world and brings guests with him, do you have a process or do you have a role in preparing those itineraries and agendas and logistics?
Madam Chair, just to confirm the question, it's about the Prime Minister's outgoing visits where he's
Yeah.
Well, for both incoming and outgoing visits, we provide the Prime Minister with the appropriate policy support. We work closely with Global Affairs to develop a recommendation to undertake the visit to begin with. When we go through that process, we look at how our foreign policy objectives could be advanced, but also tangible outcomes that could be derived from such an engagement. From time to time, depending on the time constraints, we do provide some ideas for program elements that could be considered in the context of an outgoing visit.
So let me use the example of the Prime Minister's trip to India a few years ago in his first term in office. We can recall that trip being a disaster diplomatically for many reasons, one of which is that it turned out, we found out afterwards, that the Prime Minister's office invited a known terrorist to be on as part of the Canadian delegation that visited India. Is that correct, that that happened back in the Prime Minister's first term in office?
I was not in my current position at that time.
Well, I can confirm that that did happen. And what I would say is, in terms of the lessons learned, at that point, the importance of guest lists, who the Prime Minister invites either to attend an event when foreign dignitaries are visiting Canada and having official events in Office of the Protocol domestically, but then also internationally, we found out the international embarrassment that was caused by not vetting guests properly when there are diplomatic missions and international relationship building around the world. So I ask Ms. Kennedy, in your work and any of the things leading up to this visit in the office and the work that you do, from that visit in 2017 where a terrorist was found to be on the Prime Minister's guest list for an official visit to India at that point.
Point of order.
I was actually just going to let Mr. Duncan finish his train of thought because I think it's very disrespectful. When I have stated why we are here today, you have challenged the chair, we've had a vote, and then you're choosing to not only ask questions but answer them for the witnesses. Point of order, Mrs. Romanato.
Yes, Madam Chair, I was just about to say that we've already established that the purpose of this meeting is to discuss what happens in the House. As you said, that was challenged, voted down. We have witnesses before us to discuss what happens in the House, and I'd like us to remain on that subject. Thank you.
Point of order, Chair.
Mrs. Wangenthal?
Thank you, Chair. I think the most important thing I would see that we're supposed to do here today is to ensure that this type of thing doesn't happen and embarrass our Prime Minister over and over again, whether it's due to circumstances within his office or somewhere else. We're talking about Canada's reputation and our Prime Minister's reputation, and the two are linked because we're talking about Canadians
Thank you. So
who
I think
traveled
next
with
time,
the Prime Minister
Mrs. Wangenthal,
or were represented
thank
in
you.
the House.
You've made your point. I don't think it's actually a point of order. I would encourage you perhaps next time when negotiations are being passed as to what the committee will be doing, and as somebody, I know you weren't here, but perhaps they have briefed you, the wording is basically exactly what was offered by the Conservative Party. The witnesses who were invited are basically exactly, and there was not, it was not a smooth process as to what was passed in this committee. So members are very well aware as to what took place here.
I understand the motion
We're not having
and
a
how
back and forth.
particular
Thank
it is, but it requires
I'm going to go back
feedback from
to
other dynamics to make
Mr.
sure
Duncan,
that is done.
reminding you as to the purpose of the meeting.
I have a point of order.
Mr. Gerritsen, you have a point of order?
Going to follow up on that, but no need.
Sorry, I didn't even hear you. Thank you.
did.
Thank you. I'm glad Mr. Patzer is concerned about your points of order. Thank you for all this assistance I'm getting here today. Mr. Duncan.
My point of order to say about the continued reference to the motion that was passed by PROC was on November 21st. I had attempted and trying to attempt unsuccessfully and being blocked from talking about an access to information request that was provided in the media on February the 5th. So when we passed this motion on November 21st, the information was not revealed. I'm trying to raise new information that is very relevant to the individual named in this study that we are looking at and being refused to. So if we're going to reference this November 21st date by PROC, we should also acknowledge that new information has come since that motion was passed in November 21st, and I have every right to be able to raise that and ask questions.
Mr. Gerritsen.
On that point of order, I would respectfully disagree. Mr. Duncan doesn't have the right to do that. What Mr. Duncan has the right to do is to keep within the scope of this motion. He certainly had the right to try to amend the study. The Conservatives could have come forward and said, we would like to now broaden the scope of this study, and the committee could have debated that before inviting witnesses. But when we invite witnesses here who think that the meeting and the study is about one thing and then try to introduce new topics when they arrive, it's unfair to the witnesses. So you've ruled on this many times. You keep getting pushback from Mr. Duncan on this. He's not respecting your role as a chair, Madam Speaker. I would strongly encourage you to ask him to come to order, or perhaps he would not like to participate in the meeting if he's not capable of staying within the rules that you have very clearly laid out.
It's a good day, right? We're on this side of the earth. It's a good day. Okay. I am
And as
going
another
to ask,
point of order,
do we really have to?
Yeah, another point of
Okay,
order.
yes.
Mr. Duncan should tread lightly on the fact that that November 21st meeting was actually in camera. So he might want to be careful about what he says in terms of that particular meeting and what may have or may have not happened within it.
So I'm going to just bring us back, and I offered you a 5-minute break earlier, and it feels like perhaps we need more than a 5-minute break. I am going to remind us as to why we're here today. I am going to remind us, to Mr. Duncan's point of order, that the dates and timelines that were provided within it were satisfied. So the work that the clerk and myself and we do on this side of the room had been satisfied. If there was concerns at that time, they should have been raised at that time. November was quite a bit of time ago. It's actually last year. So right now, we have a little bit more time with Ms. Kennedy, and then we've got a lot more time with Mr. Carrier and Ms. Hudson. And so I'm going to ask you, Mr. Duncan, to complete your time within the scope of the study.
I'll just do a quick point of order to Mr. Garrett's, but just so there's no, issues with my conduct here, the minutes are public here of what happened. The minutes are published, so I'm not disclosing anything. Look at the minutes. The motion that was passed
Yes.
was in
Okay,
the
there's
minutes.
okay, gentlemen, what's going on here today?
Good question.
Okay,
Question.
so let's stay focused.
Great
We
question.
have company who has joined us at PROC. People love coming to Procedure and House Affairs. We love when guests come, as you can tell. And so we're going to stay focused on the scope of the study. And Mr. Duncan has 1 minute and 10 seconds left. So please complete your round, Mr. Duncan.
So I was not able to raise information about Mr. Hunka and things and their relationship and their knowledge of Mr. Hunka through the protocol office and the PCO and PMO in the first round. And now when I'm about to ask my second question, get called a point of order again. But I'm going to ask the question to Ms. Kennedy. There was an international embarrassment with the Prime Minister's visit to India by not properly vetting a guest list, where a terrorist was brought along to the Prime Minister on that diplomatic visit, which was a disaster for that entire trip and many purposes. What lessons were learned and incorporated into this visit where, yet again, guests lists that were provided by the PMO, PCO were not properly vetted and created an international embarrassment? What was done between that India incident and this one to try to avoid this from happening in PCO in the Prime Minister's office? Mr. Kerr, if you want to address that as well, I'd be happy. What new steps have taken since that 2017 incident with a guest list that has come and been tried to be rectified since?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. With regards to the address in Parliament, PCO was not aware that this individual was going to be invited to the address to Parliament, nor was he going to be recognized there. We had no visibility on that. I would also add that given the need to respect the role of parliamentarians and the operations of the House of Commons, there was no other role for the Privy Council office in this situation.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I have no information on 2017. I was not in protocol or on the India desk. What I do know is that I think there are steps that can be taken to avoid another incident like this here at the House of Commons with the Speaker's office. And my understanding is that that procedure has been reviewed, and I'm pretty certain that the committee can find new recommendations to make sure that that doesn't happen again, because that's the incident that made the news, not the Toronto event.
It is. The commentary that's coming from the member is also very appropriate. So, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was 6 minutes, 6 seconds, so I'll take that minute off of Mr. Duncan's next round. Going over to Mr. Lauzon. 5 minutes for the chair.
à tous. Thank you, folks, for being here. Thanks for your service. It's much appreciated. Now, in your opening remarks, you spoke to the issue of who does what the protocol is. You provided information, as did Ms. Kennedy, to inform us. And you also talked about the guest lists of your respective roles therein. But you've piqued my curiosity when you spoke to the issue of capacity. And I'm trying to work on solutions here. I'd like to ask of each of you, starting with Mr. Carrière, could you please talk about your capacity to manage what you have to do with the work you have in your portfolio? And how could that capacity be enhanced, be it physical capacity, your staff, your logistical, IT, research capacity, collaboration with other bodies, access to information that you enjoy? Speak, please, writ large about your capacity, and could that be part and parcel of one of the committee's recommendations in due course? Well, thank you for your question, sir. Madam Chair, with official visits in particular, well, when a visit is organised, that's when we need more help, because it's a peak period. And vetting is not one of my office's functions at the protocol office. We get a list from the client, for example, the PMO's office, and we take it for granted that that vetting job has been done upstream. As far as capacity is concerned, there's no manager in the public service who'd say that they want more roles to play, but were we to look at the...
This question is a question that has no relation to the scope of the study, because they don't deal with these lists. So why is the member allowed to ask a question about, respectfully, things that you probably need within your department, but in no way impacts the scope of the study?
Point d'ordre, Madame la Présidente.
On a point of order, Madam Chair, my question has to do with finding solutions, coming up with solutions, enhancing the service, whether it has to do with the guest lists or that kind of management and training. I've tried to broach this from different angles. There's the logistical aspect to all of this, which is highly pertinent to the study we're conducting.
I got the same one. The chair's ruling got sustained. And ask about it.
Were you finished answering your question, or did you want to continue?
Peut-être que, Madame la Présidente, je pourrais juste...
If I could just close by saying that for our office or another office, there may be a way to augment capacity without there being too much of a cost. For example, AI, that's a potential solution. We often hear that it's the future. And perhaps, I don't think artificial intelligence could do the work that we do at the protocol office, but perhaps AI could verify and vet lists more quickly than a human being. So that's my input for the time being. Well, without repeating the question per se, Ms. Kennedy, what about you? Could you please elaborate on everything and anything that has to do with the event that we experienced, the particular incident at hand?
Question. The Foreign and Defense Policy Secretariat is incredibly lean, which means that we very much have to focus on the mandate that we are given in support to Prime Minister's international engagements, and that very much focuses on policy and substantive support. We do rely heavily on other entities to do the appropriate processes so that we can stay very much focused on the issues at hand. I would just mention that, given that my time is almost up, that we very much welcome the outcome of this committee. We're very happy to work with all of the stakeholders involved to ensure that this does not happen again.
Merci beaucoup. On a parlé.
Thank you. We've talked about a whole lot of things, but we haven't talked much about, well, you provided a good summary of the risks associated with an event that takes place abroad, and thank you for sharing your experience of what occurred with the Prime Minister. But we haven't spoken very much about the risk management in terms of public image. Of course, there's a lot of talk about security and about criminal records and background checks, but as a committee, how can we come up with relevant recommendations as to having to do with Canada's the management of Canada's risk management of Canada's image when it comes to protocol? Thank you very much for the question. If I could just come back to what was said earlier regarding being a guest. Being one out of 1,000 guests, well, there's a level of risk that's, of course, recognised by the Speaker of the House, and a speech by a head of state is another risk level. So aside from criminal background checks, the verifications and vetting that we make have to be proportionate with the importance accorded to that person in question.
Madame Boudreau.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Well, what's just occurred over the past hour is completely unacceptable to my mind. We're supposed to be responsible members of Parliament here, and I'm going to conduct myself as an adult. So, first, I'd like to thank you for being here. Second, Madam Chairperson, when witnesses starting to repeat themselves, that means we've derived the maximum amount of input from them. Now, at committee, are we able to glean experience and lessons? I had about 30 questions, the majority of which have already been answered. So given what's ahead of you tomorrow, and I know that you have a lot of work cut out, you have your work cut out for you, so we don't want to waste your time. As far as I'm concerned, Madam Chairperson, I have no further questions. I'm sure that the witnesses are going to provide us a more detailed breakdown to some of our questions. We don't want a big round table about this. These witnesses have their expertise, and I think that it's been an invaluable hour, but for me, and that's enough. Thank you very much.
On a 1 heure avec Priscilla, 2 heures.
We have
Continue avec Madame Matheson.
Ms. Matheson. The floor is yours if you wish. Well, it was just a suggestion. I want to be efficient, I want to be respectful, and I don't want to waste witnesses' time to score political points.
I'd certainly be in favour, in agreement with Madame Goudreau. But just in terms of the independence that is supposed to be shown between both branches, after the incident occurred, there was correspondence between government offices, some of your offices, about this affair and the Speaker's office. Again, it's all supposed to be independent. Do you have any comments about that? How, or if any, there was a disconnect in terms of that rule of independence between offices after the issue came forward?
Thank you to the honourable member for a question, Madam Chair. You're looking ahead, right? That's the point of this study. So again, I would come back to the different levels, and at some point down the road, there will be another visit with another address to Parliament. And if I'm still in this job, I might get very nervous at the thought of that. So is there a way, without, impeding on the independence of the legislative branch, is there a way for a conversation to be had, perhaps Speaker to Parliamentary Protocol to us, on what the intention of that office are for the address to Parliament? That would be great. Our responsibility is to look after the visiting guests. We take that responsibility very seriously. And I was shattered when that came out, when that happened. It came out after President Zelensky had left. It had been an excellent visit on all fronts. And then this came out and sort of shattered everything, and I felt extremely bad for President Zelensky. So perhaps finding a way, while respecting, everybody's prerogatives, to include any, additional elements in the speaker's gallery to our conversations with all the various, federal partners that we deal with on the visit. Maybe that's something that we can look at going forward.
And how many, I know this may be difficult, but to estimate your best guesses, how many visits do you arrange, say, in a given year? How many have incident and how many do not have incidents?
I actually have numbers. This question comes up often. So of course, can I? Right. So it varies year to year. Sometimes there could be an election, sometimes there could be a pandemic. But I have 2023 numbers, just to give you a sense. So we had 33 incoming visits. So that's state visit, working, ministerial, official, private, and guest of government, yes. So 33 incoming, and then 116 outgoing visits last year. Last year was a big year for outgoing because folks had not traveled basically in 2 years. So that's GGPM, our three ministers at GAC, and our parliamentary secretaries as well, and a couple of inaugurations and funerals. So those are the numbers for last year.
Well, the part of the question was like how many had incidences like such as this and how many didn't?
On the scale of that incident, 0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy, I'm not sure that you're able to stay. I know you were invited for 1 hour, so your time has come to an end with us. But if you'd like to stay, you're welcome to. But I can see that you need to go.
I do, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. We will continue. Unless witnesses need a break, we'll just continue with yourselves. Is that okay? Okay, perfect. And I think I'll just continue with our list. Is that okay? Okay, so we'll just continue with our list and we'll keep moving forward without one witness. Perfect. So we'll go to Mr. Duncan. Mr. Berthold.
Yeah. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Carrière, Madame Hudson. Désolé d'avoir manqué.
Chair. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for your appearance today. I'm told that there was a lot going on in the first hour of this meeting. I'd like to talk about the process that led to the invitation of Mr. Hunka. It was clear when we saw Mr. Hunka in the gallery, he was sitting where people are generally recognized by the speaker. Who decided where he'd be sitting? Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. At the Protocol Office, we don't know who gets invited to the House of Commons and who gets recognized. We have a role with two parts of that list. Sometimes there's enough room in the gallery. And who is part of the diplomatic corps here in Ottawa?
Sorry to interrupt you, but normally when there are folks from the diplomatic corps, the protocol office is automatically involved because you reserve a number of spots for members of the diplomatic corps. so that the Speaker can acknowledge them. Isn't that correct? Yes, when it comes to the diplomatic corps in Ottawa, yes, that's true. Now, does someone advise you at that point that there were some seats or spots that were not available because the Speaker had reserved those spots for some particular individual? Response: well, everything we do is at the request of the Parliamentary Protocol Office. They say which ambassador or should be invited, but we don't go into the seating arrangements. No, you don't get involved. Oh, so you don't get involved in the seating arrangements in the House of Commons. You just say we need X number of spots, X number of seats to the Parliamentary and House of Commons Protocol officers. They tell us who's going to be invited, they consult us, and that's where the matter ends. Well, it's my understanding that you weren't consulted as far as Mr. Hunker's invitation was concerned. Now, did you have any dealings with Mr. Hunker's family or himself in any other context? Response: we sent the invitation for the event to Toronto, and I think that you saw that. That was the subject of an access to information request. It was an email sent to his personal address, and we didn't get any response to that. So there was no contact entered into aside from that invitation. And when you transmit that kind of invitation to folks that aren't members of the diplomatic corps, who do the requests come for those invitations? Well, they come from the client. For example, the PMO's office or other ministers' offices or global affairs. And it's the PMO's office and the Ukrainian Congress that had put that name forward to the PMO's office. Now, how is it that an individual who hasn't responded to a protocol request actually gets to take part in this kind of event? I know it's complicated. You have a name, you submit that name, but how could that individual have taken part at the end of the day at the event in Toronto? Well, Madam Chair, there are two very separate and distinct processes, as I alluded to earlier. Madam Speaker, whether it's in French or English.
Duncan was doing, and now he's just doing it in French. So I think that it would be, perhaps he just arrived back at the meeting. You want to update him on your previous rulings that you've already made at this committee meeting.
Sur ce point d'ordre.
On that point of order, Madam Chairperson, all I'm doing is tacking on to Mr. Carrier's response. I didn't raise the specific issue of Toronto myself. Mr. Carrier cited the incident in Toronto, so I'm asking questions on the basis of his question. I didn't raise the issue myself. I'm just wanting an answer to my question since Mr. Carrier is the one who first spoke about that incident. So I think it's well within my rights, since he put the issue on the table, to continue with my round of questions, if I may, Madam Chair.
So I'm going to say, in this situation, as somebody who's listening to it, just to bring you up to speed, Mr. Berthold, we did have a conversation at the beginning just to stay focused on it. I do have to agree with Mr. Berthold because it's a little bit different when it's a line of questioning. And so when there's a line of questioning and there's some spaces, doors being opened, you sometimes have to walk through them. But I would just say we have had a very tense meeting already, and it was nice to see you. So I'm really happy that you're here. So thank you for coming. And so I would just ask that we try to just, okay. But I agree with you, yes.
Je vais juste terminer là-dessus, Madame la Présidente, parce que moi...
Well, I'll just close on this particular issue. My time is running out in any event. Mr. Carrier, how is it possible? Could you explain this to me? If I want to bring someone to a protocol event and I don't have an invitation for them, well, then they won't get the invitation. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Now, I raised the event in Toronto because the member had asked me whether my office had had any contact with Mr. Hunker. And as I said, these are two very separate and distinct processes. The Toronto invitation was the purview of my office, from the PMO's office at the recommendation of the Ukrainian embassy, and they didn't respond to that invitation. Now, as far as the invitation to the House of Commons is concerned, I have no further information on that because we are not involved in any way whatsoever in that process. And as I explained earlier, we were asked questions about the diplomatic corps and about the delegation, and we never see the complete list at the end of the day.
Désolé.
Sorry about that.
Bien fait, Mr. Berthold.
Well done, Mr. Berthold. Thank you very much again.
Garrettson, 5 minutes to the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for being here. If I understood you correctly in your opening statement, you said that your role for protocol is everything basically outside of this building, with the exception of maybe a hallway or something. Is that true?
Yeah, so the parliamentary protocol is in charge here on the Hill. But we do, upstairs, the PM's corridor, they call it, where the PMO is in the cabinet room.
But you certainly don't have jurisdiction, or for lack of a better term, jurisdiction over the chamber.
No.
But yet you're here
absolutely not.
as a witness on a study that we're doing on something that happened in the chamber. And I want to echo the comments of Madame Goudreau. I greatly appreciate the work that you do. I found it very interesting if the purpose served nothing less than understanding what it is exactly you do in developing those relationships and maintaining those relationships between Canada and other countries, and the work that you do is incredible. But I would agree with Madame Goudreau that I think we have kept you here long enough. We are starting to ask the same questions and get the same answers. So I appreciate your time here and everything that you do. But Madam Chair, I think that with that, I would move that we adjourn the meeting.
Another cover-up.
Yeah.
Ms. Romanato.
Oui.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Oui, merci.
Madame Fournier. Fortier.
Oui, merci.
Mr. Duguid.
Yes.
Mr. Garrettson.
Yes.
Mr. Duncan.
We must be getting somewhere, so no.
Hey, commentary.
Monsieur Berthold. Sûrement non à une autre opération de camouflage.
No, on a...
Mr. Pat.
No, not when it's another cover-up.